Marcus Aurelius, The Philosopher-Emperor's Life, Stoic Sleep Story. Close your eyes now and let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into rest, deeper into comfort, as if the bed itself is holding you in its gentle embrace. Tonight, we journey back through the mists of time, back nearly 2,000 years to ancient Rome, to a world of marble columns and quiet gardens, where a young prince learned the wisdom that would guide emperors and comfort souls across all the ages to come. This is a story without urgency, without drama. It is simply the gentle unfolding of one man's life, a life devoted to wisdom, to duty, to the quiet practice of living well. Let the images wash over you like warm water. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to do. Just listen and drift and allow these ancient scenes to carry you soft towards sleep. Marcus Aurelius awaits us in the golden light of Rome, in the still hours of dawn, in the peaceful corners where philosophy and power met in harmony. We will walk with him through his days, watch him study as a boy, sit beside him as he writes by candlelight, rest with him in the gardens where he found his peace. There is no hurry in this telling. We have all the time in the world, and sleep will come exactly when it should. Breathe deeply now. Feel your chest rise and fall, steady as the tides, constant as the turning of the seasons. In ancient Rome, Marcus Aurelius breathed this same air, felt this same need for rest, sought this same peace we seek tonight. And across the centuries, his wisdom reaches us still, gentle as a hand on your shoulder, saying, "Rest now, all is well, you are safe." Let us begin this journey together, you and I, into the peaceful life of the philosopher-emperor. In those days, when the Roman Empire stretched from the mist-covered hills of Britain to the sun-baked deserts of Africa, when all roads led to Rome and the city stood as the center of the known world, there was born a boy who would become both emperor and philosopher. His birth name was Marcus Annius Verus, and he came into the world in the year 121 of the Common Era, on a mild spring day when the gardens of Rome were thick with the scent of blooming flowers. His family was of old Roman nobility, comfortable and respected, living in a spacious villa where fountains trickled peacefully in interior courtyards, and where the sound of birdsong mingled with the distant murmur of the city. Young Marcus was a quiet child, thoughtful beyond his years. In the early morning light, before the household fully stirred, he would sometimes sit in the garden, watching the way the dawn transformed everything it touched. The marble statues seemed to warm and breathe. The roses opened their petals to the gentle sun. The dew sparkled like scattered diamonds on the grass. Even as a small boy, he noticed these things. He paid attention to the world around him with a careful, tender awareness that would serve him all his life. While other children ran and shouted, Marcus would pause to watch an ant carrying a crumb, or trace with his finger the pattern of veins in a leaf, or listen to the way the fountain's song changed with the shifting breeze. His father died when Marcus was very young, too young to remember him clearly. But the boy was blessed with a loving grandfather, also named Marcus Annius Verus, who became his guardian and first teacher in the ways of living honorably. The old man would walk with young Marcus through the villa's colonnade, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished stone. "Watch how you conduct yourself," the grandfather would say gently, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "Not for others to see, but because you see yourself. A good character is its own reward." These simple lessons settled into the boy's heart like seeds in fertile soil, growing quietly, shaping him in ways he would only understand years later. The grandfather was patient, never harsh. When young Marcus made mistakes, as all children do, the old man would simply ask, "What did you learn?" There was no anger, No punishment that left shame in its wake. Only gentle guidance. Only the steady modeling of dignity and self-control. Marcus watched his grandfather move through the days with a kind of grace, never rushing, never raising his voice, meeting each person and each situation with the same calm courtesy. It was a way of being in the world that spoke louder than any lecture. Breathe deeply. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. The household where Marcus grew up was one of calm routine and cultured learning. Each morning began the same way, and there was comfort in this predictability. Before the sun fully rose, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the family would gather for a simple breakfast of bread and fruit, sometimes fish, sometimes cheese. They ate without hurry, speaking softly of the day ahead, of plans and duties and small matters of household management. Young Marcus learned to appreciate these quiet rituals. The way the light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. The taste of fresh bread still warm from the oven. The unhurried conversation that never demanded anything of him but presence. Nothing was rushed. Everything had its place and time. The servants moved through their tasks with practiced efficiency, but without stress or strain. There was a rhythm to the household, like the rhythm of breathing, like the rhythm of waves on a shore. Marcus absorbed this rhythm, learned from it, carried it with him throughout his life. Even when he would later command armies and govern an empire, he would remember these peaceful mornings, and he would try to bring this same quality of unrushed presence to whatever he did. After breakfast, as the household came fully to life and the sounds of Rome grew louder beyond the walls, Marcus would go to his studies. His family believed deeply in education, understanding that a mind well trained was a gift that could never be taken away. They engaged the finest teachers in Rome to instruct the boy, men of learning and patience who understood that true education was not the mere accumulation of facts, but the development of character and understanding. His first tutors taught him Greek and Latin, the essential languages of an educated Roman, the keys that would unlock all the treasures of literature and philosophy. Marcus proved an eager student, not because he sought praise or hoped to outshine others, but because he genuinely loved learning. He would sit at a simple wooden desk, a wax tablet before him, carefully forming letters with his stylus. The scraping sound of stylus on wax became one of the comforting sounds of his childhood, like rain on roof tiles or wind in olive trees. He would practice the same letter over and over, seeking not perfection but improvement, not speed but care. When he made an error, he would smooth the wax and begin again, patient with himself, understanding that learning was a process, a journey without end. In those days, education for a young nobleman included not only languages, but also rhetoric, geometry, music, and literature. Marcus studied them all with patient attention, giving each subject the focus it deserved. But even as a child, he was drawn most powerfully to philosophy, to questions about how to live, what truly mattered, how to be good in a world that was not always good. His tutors noticed this inclination and encouraged it, introducing him first to the dialogues of Plato, where Socrates wandered through Athens asking questions, seeking wisdom in conversation and contemplation. Marcus would read these dialogues slowly, sometimes reading the same passage multiple times, not to memorize it, but to understand it, to let it work on him. He would pause and look up from the scroll, gazing out the window at the garden, thinking about what he had read, turning the ideas over in his mind like a craftsman examining a piece of wood, considering it from different angles, feeling its weight and grain. His tutors learned not to rush him, not to push him forward to the next lesson before he had fully absorbed the current one. They recognized that this boy learned differently, more deeply, and they honored that. And so the boy grew, season following season, year flowing into year, in an atmosphere of learning and gentleness. When he was not studying, Marcus would often retreat to the garden. There was a particular spot he favored, beneath an ancient fig tree whose branches spread wide, offering shade and shelter. The tree had been there longer than anyone could remember, had stood through generations of the family, and would stand for generations yet to come. Beneath its canopy, Marcus felt held, protected, at peace. He would sit there, sometimes with a scroll, sometimes with nothing but his own thoughts, watching the patterns of light and shadow shift across the ground as the sun moved through the sky. He would listen to the fountain's eternal song, the trickling water that never stopped, never hurried, simply flowed as water must flow. He would watch butterflies visit the flowers, would observe the way the wind moved through the leaves, would notice how the quality of light changed from morning to afternoon to evening. In these moments, young Marcus began to develop the habit of contemplation that would sustain him throughout his life, the ability to simply be present, to observe without judgment, to rest in awareness. The afternoons were reserved for physical training, as was proper for a Roman youth of noble birth. Marcus learned to ride horses, feeling the powerful muscles beneath him, learning to communicate with the animal through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. He learned to wrestle, to throw the javelin, to practice with the sword. But even here, in these activities of the body, he approached them with a kind of philosophical mindfulness. He learned that the body, too, required discipline and care. He learned that physical exertion could quiet the mind, that after a long ride through the countryside, thoughts settled like dust after wind, and a peaceful clarity emerged. He was never the strongest or the swiftest among his peers. Other boys could throw farther, run faster, wrestle more successfully. But Marcus was steady, reliable, willing to endure discomfort without complaint. He didn't compete to win, but practiced to improve. He understood, even then, that the value of these exercises was not in defeating others, but in training himself, in developing the virtues of persistence and courage, in learning his body's capabilities and limits. In the evenings, as the heat of the day gave way to cool twilight, the household would gather again. Sometimes there would be dinner guests, other noble families, scholars, poets, men of affairs who discussed the matters of the city and the empire. Marcus would sit quietly at these dinners, listening to the adult conversations, absorbing the rhythms of cultured Roman society. He learned by observation how people conducted themselves, how they spoke to one another, how they disagreed with grace or revealed their character through small gestures of kindness or selfishness. Everything was a lesson if you paid attention, and Marcus paid attention. He noticed which men spoke only to elevate themselves and which spoke to illuminate truth. He noticed who listened carefully and who waited impatiently for their turn to talk. He noticed who treated the servants with courtesy and who dismissed them as if they were furniture. All of this information was stored away, becoming part of his education in human nature, in ethics, in the question of how to live well among others. And when the dinners ended and the guests departed, when the household grew quiet and the lamps were dimmed, Marcus would lie in his bed and think about what he had observed, learning from the day, preparing himself for tomorrow. Breathe deeply. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. And in this peace, we continue. When Marcus was 15 years old, something happened that would change the entire course of his life. The Emperor Hadrian, who had ruled Rome with wisdom and vigor for more than 20 years, was dying. Hadrian had no sons of his own, no direct heir to inherit the throne, and so he faced the question that had troubled many emperors before him. Who would rule after him? who could be trusted with the vast power and responsibility of the empire. Hadrian was himself an adopted heir, and he decided to continue this tradition, selecting as his successor a mature, steady senator named Antoninus. But Hadrian made one condition for this adoption, one requirement that Antoninus must fulfill. He must, in turn, adopt two boys as his own heirs, ensuring the succession for two generations. One was Lucius Verus, the son of the man Hadrian had originally chosen, but who had died before ascending to power. The other was Marcus, the quiet, thoughtful boy who loved philosophy and gardens. And so, in a single moment, with a stroke of Hadrian's pen and a formal declaration, young Marcus went from being a nobleman's grandson to being the adopted son of the future emperor, and thus himself in line for the throne of Rome. It was a transformation that would have overwhelmed many young men, filling them with ambition and excitement, with dreams of power and glory. But Marcus, even at 15, seemed to understand the weight of it differently. He felt not excitement, but a deep sense of responsibility, even trepidation. He knew, or sensed, that to rule Rome would be a burden, not a prize. It would mean endless duties, constant decisions, the weight of millions of lives resting on his shoulders. It would mean sacrifice, difficulty, the surrender of personal desires to public need. His new father, Antoninus Pius, became one of the most important figures in Marcus's life, perhaps the most important teacher he ever had. Antoninus was already middle-aged when he became emperor, a calm and dignified man who approached power with humility and common sense. He was called pious because of his devotion to duty and his deep respect for tradition and family. He had no hunger for glory, no desire to conquer new territories or build monuments to himself. He simply wanted to govern well, to maintain peace and prosperity, to serve the empire faithfully. For Marcus, Antoninus became the model of what a good man looked like in the highest position of power, a living demonstration that virtue and authority could coexist. Each morning, Marcus would rise early and join Antoninus in the emperor's private chambers. The rooms were surprisingly modest for the ruler of the known world, comfortable but not opulent, furnished with simple elegance. There were no golden fixtures or jeweled decorations, just good furniture, useful objects, the tools of governance. Antoninus would already be awake when Marcus arrived, often reading official documents by lamplight, his face calm and focused. "Good morning, my son," he would say, looking up with a gentle smile. Marcus would bow slightly and take his seat nearby, beginning his own morning reading while Antoninus worked. These quiet mornings together taught Marcus more than any formal instruction could have. He watched how Antoninus approached problems, never with anger or haste, but with careful thought and consultation. When difficult decisions arose, when the easy path conflicted with the right path, Antoninus would sometimes set them aside for a day, saying, "Let us not act from the heat of the moment. Tomorrow we will see more clearly." Marcus absorbed this patience like a plant absorbs sunlight. He learned that to rule, well, meant to think clearly, and to think clearly required calm, required space, required the discipline not to react immediately to every provocation or crisis. Antoninus treated everyone with the same courtesy, whether they were senators or servants, whether they brought good news or bad, whether they agreed with him or opposed him. Marcus noticed this especially. He saw his adoptive father speak gently to the slaves who tended the palace, thank the cooks who prepared meals, acknowledge the guards who stood watch through long nights. "These people make our life possible," Antoninus explained once. "Why should we not show them respect? A man's character is revealed in how he treats those who can do nothing for him." This simple humanity impressed itself deeply on Marcus's character, became part of his own approach to people and power. During these years of apprenticeship in the imperial household, Marcus also continued his philosophical education with even greater intensity. Antoninus arranged for him to study with the greatest teachers in Rome and beyond, understanding that if Marcus was to rule someday, he needed not just technical knowledge of law and administration, but wisdom about human nature, about ethics, about the deeper questions of how to live. Among these teachers, several would become profoundly important to Marcus, shaping his understanding of philosophy and life itself. The first was a man named Junius Rusticus, an older senator who was himself a devoted student of Stoic philosophy. Rusticus had a quiet charisma, a stillness about him that drew people in rather than pushing them away. When he spoke, his words were few but carefully chosen. He never raised his voice, never showed impatience, never wasted time on trivial matters. Marcus was fascinated by this quality of presence, this ability to be fully attentive to whatever was at hand, whether it was a profound philosophical question or a simple practical matter. Rusticus introduced Marcus to the teachings of Epictetus, a former slave who had become one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, a man who had taught that true freedom was not a matter of legal status, but of inner condition. Epictetus had died some years before Marcus was born, but his teachings had been preserved by a student named Arrian in a collection called the Discourses and a shorter handbook called the Enchiridion. When Marcus first began reading these texts, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. Here, finally, was someone speaking directly about the questions that had occupied his mind since childhood. How should we live? What can we control? How do we find peace in a troubled world? Breathe deeply. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. Epictetus taught that we must distinguish between what is in our power and what is not. We have no control over external events, over what others do, over our circumstances, over whether we are rich or poor, healthy or sick, praised or blamed. But we have complete control over our own judgments, our responses, our inner character, the way we choose to interpret and react to whatever happens. It's not things that upset us, Epictetus wrote, but our judgments about things. Marcus read these words in the quiet of his study, and they resonated in his chest like a bell's clear tone. He began to practice this principle in his daily life, applying it to the small frustrations and disappointments that inevitably arose. When something frustrating occurred, a delayed appointment, a thoughtless remark, a setback in his studies, Marcus would pause and ask himself, "Is this within my control?" Often the answer was no. And if it was not within his control, why disturb himself over it? Why add mental suffering to whatever external situation he faced? This simple practice brought him a tremendous sense of relief and freedom. So much of what troubled people, he realized, came from struggling against things that could not be changed, from desiring outcomes that were not theirs to command. Under Rusticus's guidance, Marcus also learned to examine his own thoughts and motivations with ruthless honesty. Each evening, before sleep, he would review the day, not to criticize himself harshly, but to notice where he had acted according to his principles and where he had fallen short. Had he been patient today? Had he spoken truthfully? Had he treated others with the dignity they deserved? When he had failed, why had he failed? What had he been afraid of? What had he desired too much? This practice of evening reflection became a cornerstone of his life, a daily reckoning that kept him honest with himself, that prevented him from drifting unconsciously through his days. Another teacher who shaped Marcus deeply was a man named Apollonius of Chalcedon, who taught him the value of consistency and firmness of purpose. Apollonius lived his philosophy visibly. You could see his principles in action in every gesture, every decision. He taught Marcus that philosophy was not abstract theory, but a way of life, something to be practiced in every moment, not merely discussed in the schools. The philosopher, Apollonius would say, is known by their actions, not their arguments. Anyone can talk about virtue. The true philosopher embodies it. From yet another teacher, Sextus of Carinthia, Marcus learned kindness and consideration for others. Sextus showed him how to forgive freely, how to assume the best intentions in others, how to bear wrongs without becoming bitter. Marcus watched Sextus interact with people from all walks of life, merchants, soldiers, scholars, servants, and noticed that he gave each person his full attention, treated each conversation as important, never dismissed anyone as beneath his notice. This was not performance or technique, but genuine respect for the humanity in everyone. The years passed peacefully. Marcus grew from a youth into a young man, his features settling into the thoughtful, serious expression that we see in his busts and portraits. His education continued in all its dimensions: philosophical, rhetorical, legal, administrative. He learned how the empire functioned, how laws were made and enforced, how provinces were governed, how armies were supplied and led. But through it all, his Stoic practice remained central. In the morning, he would rise before dawn and spend time in contemplation, often reading from Epictetus or other Stoic texts, reminding himself of the day's principles. He developed certain practices that grounded him, personal rituals that connected him to his philosophy and kept him centered. Each morning, upon waking, he would speak to himself, a kind of preparatory meditation for the day ahead, a way of steeling himself for whatever challenges might come. Today I will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly, he would say to himself. This was not pessimism but preparation, not criticism of others, but realistic recognition of human nature. But I have seen the beauty and goodness of the virtuous, he would continue, and the ugliness of vice. I know that wrongdoers are my brothers, not by blood, but because we share reason and a portion of the divine. They cannot harm me, for no one can force me to do wrong, nor can I be angry with them or hate them. We are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like rows of upper and lower teeth. To work against one another is contrary to nature. This morning practice set the tone for his entire day. By anticipating difficulties and framing them philosophically before they occurred, Marcus was rarely caught off guard by human failings, neither his own nor others. He approached each day with a kind of prepared serenity, ready for whatever might come, already committed to responding with virtue regardless of circumstances. It was like a soldier putting on armor before battle, except the armor was not metal but mindset, not physical protection but philosophical preparation. In those days, Marcus also spent time writing. He kept notebooks in which he would record thoughts, reminders to himself, reflections on his reading and experiences. These writings were never intended for publication, never meant for others' eyes. They were simply his private dialogue with himself, a way of clarifying his thinking and recommitting to his principles. He would sit at a simple desk in his study, a lamp flickering nearby, and write in careful Greek, the language of philosophy, the language he associated with these inner conversations. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact, he wrote on one occasion. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. On another evening, after a particularly difficult day of imperial business, he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." These were not brilliant original insights. Marcus would have been the first to admit that. They were ancient Stoic teachings, ideas he had learned from Epictetus and other masters. But by writing them in his own words, in his own hand, Marcus made them his own. He internalized them, wore them smooth like river stones in his pocket, until they became part of the fabric of his being. Breathe deeply. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. And in this peace, we continue. The gardens of the imperial palace became Marcus's refuge during these years. There was one garden in particular, enclosed by columns and planted with roses, lavender, and herbs, where a fountain played endlessly in the center of a marble basin. Marcus would walk there in the afternoons when his official duties were finished, sometimes alone, sometimes with a teacher or friend, pacing slowly along the gravel paths, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind engaged with philosophical questions or simply resting in the present moment. He loved the garden at different times of day, finding something to appreciate in each. In the morning, when dew still clung to the petals and the air was cool and fresh, everything seemed new and full of possibility. At midday, when the sun was high and the shadows were short and sharp, the garden blazed with color and light, almost overwhelming in its intensity. But especially at twilight, when the light turned golden and then purple, when the day's heat began to release its grip and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. This was when Marcus found the garden most peaceful, most conducive to contemplation. In the garden, Marcus would practice what the Stoics called seeing things as they are, stripping away the layers of interpretation and judgment that we usually project onto our experience. He would look at a rose and try to see it without the overlay of concepts like beautiful or valuable or fleeting. It was simply itself: petals, stem, thorns, color, scent. This practice of seeing things without the overlay of opinion helped Marcus maintain perspective. So much of human suffering, he understood, came from the stories we tell about things, not from the things themselves. We say this is terrible or this is wonderful, when really these are just events, just facts, and our happiness or unhappiness depends more on our judgments than on the events. He applied this practice to more difficult subjects too. When someone insulted him or opposed him politically, Marcus would pause and see the person as they really were, a human being, acting according to their nature and understanding, doing what they believed was right or necessary or advantageous. Once you saw clearly, anger became difficult to sustain. You might still disagree, might still need to act to prevent harm, but you could do so without the poison of personal resentment, without making it about your ego or pride. The Stoics taught that we are all connected, all part of one great organism, like cells in a body or citizens in a city. What benefits one ultimately benefits all. What harms one ultimately harms all. Marcus thought about this often in the garden, observing how the plants depended on insects for pollination, how the insects depended on plants for food, how everything was woven together in an intricate web of mutual dependence. Human society was no different. We needed each other. We were made for cooperation, not conflict. Even those who seemed to work against us were playing their role in the larger pattern. This vision of universal connection brought Marcus both comfort and challenge. Comfort, because it meant he was never truly alone, never separate from the great flow of life. Challenge, because it meant he bore responsibility for the whole, not just for himself. His actions rippled outward, affecting others in ways he might never see. Therefore, he must act carefully, thoughtfully, with consideration for how his choices would impact the larger community. This was especially important given his position. As emperor, his decisions would affect millions. The weight of that responsibility could have been crushing, but the Stoic framework helped him bear it. He was not trying to control everything, only to respond wisely to whatever came, to play his role well within the larger drama. In the year 145, when Marcus was 24 years old, he married. His bride was Faustina, the daughter of his adoptive father Antoninus. The marriage had been arranged years earlier, but by the time it occurred, genuine affection had grown between them. Faustina was intelligent and strong-willed, accustomed to the complexities of imperial life, capable of holding her own in a world of political intrigue and social maneuvering. The wedding was celebrated with appropriate ceremony, with public festivities and private rituals, but Marcus approached it, as he approached most things, with a sense of duty more than jubilation. Their life together settled into rhythms of domesticity alongside the demands of public life. Faustina gave birth to many children over the years, 13 in all, though tragically, as was common in those times, many would not survive to adulthood. Marcus loved his children with a tenderness that might have surprised those who knew only his public persona, his philosopher's reserve. He would play with them when they were small, tell them stories, watch them learn and grow. He delighted in their innocence, their curiosity, their unself-conscious joy in simple things. But he also understood, with characteristic Stoic realism, that his children were not truly his. They were gifts on loan, separate beings with their own natures and destinies. He could guide them, provide for them, love them deeply, but he could not control their lives or their fates. This understanding helped him bear the grief of those who died young. The pain was real and deep, but it did not break him. He mourned as a father, but he accepted as a Stoic, recognizing that death was natural, that loss was woven into the fabric of love, that to live was to be vulnerable to suffering. In the quiet evenings at home, Marcus would sometimes sit with Faustina in their private chambers, away from the ceremonies and audiences of imperial life. They would talk about the children, about household matters, sometimes about the weighty affairs of state that occupied Marcus's days. Faustina had her own intelligence about politics and people. She understood the currents of Roman society, the ambitions and alliances that shaped events. Marcus valued her counsel, though he didn't always take it. They were partners in the great enterprise of life, bound together by circumstance and choice, making their way as best they could through the complexities of marriage and family and empire. The years of Marcus's education and preparation seemed to stretch endlessly, a long, peaceful interlude of learning and growth. Antoninus Pius ruled Rome with steady competence for more than 20 years, and throughout that time, Marcus served at his side, learning the craft of governance, the weight of responsibility, the countless small decisions that accumulated into a reign. He attended Senate meetings, consulted on legal matters, received foreign ambassadors, reviewed petitions from citizens. He learned that ruling was mostly mundane work, daily attention to detail, not the grand dramatic moments that historians would later emphasize. Breathe deeply. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. The Emperor Antoninus aged gracefully. He remained vigorous and clear-headed well into his 70s, still rising early, still attending to the business of empire with patient diligence. But eventually, as must happen to all mortal things, his health began to fail. In the spring of the year 161, Antoninus took ill. It was nothing dramatic, a fever, fatigue, loss of appetite. But at his age, such illness was serious, and everyone understood what it likely meant. Marcus attended his adoptive father throughout those final weeks. He sat by Antoninus's bedside in the quiet hours, held the old man's hand, ensured he was comfortable. They spoke little, there was little left to say. Their relationship had been expressed across 2 decades of patient teaching and learning, of morning hours shared in comfortable silence, of an affection that needed no eloquent declaration. Everything important had already been said in how they lived together, how they treated each other, how Antoninus had prepared Marcus for this moment, and Marcus had absorbed those preparations. As the end approached, Antoninus called his advisors and gave his final instructions. He entrusted the empire to Marcus, whom he had prepared so carefully for this responsibility. To the guard who came for the watchword, the daily password that symbolized the emperor's authority, Antoninus whispered a single word: equanimity. Then he turned over, as if to sleep, and died peacefully. The word was perfect, capturing everything Antoninus had tried to teach, everything he had modeled: equanimity, evenness of mind, the ability to remain calm and centered regardless of circumstances. The transition of power was seamless. Marcus Aurelius, at the age of 39, became emperor of Rome. It was everything his entire life had been preparing him for, and yet he felt no joy in it, only the weight of duty. He understood that to rule the empire meant to carry the burden of millions of lives, to make decisions that would ripple across continents and generations. It was a responsibility he had never sought, but one he would not shirk. The Stoics taught that we should accept our fate, play the role assigned to us by nature or fortune, do our duty without complaint. This was Marcus's fate, his role. He would play it as well as he could. One of Marcus's first acts as emperor was to insist on sharing power with his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus. Though Marcus could have claimed sole authority, he remembered Hadrian's intention to provide Rome with two heirs. He elevated Lucius to co-emperor, creating an unprecedented arrangement: two equal rulers, joint Augusti, sharing the purple. It was an act that revealed Marcus's character, his selflessness, his willingness to honor commitments, his lack of personal ambition. He didn't need all the power for himself. He was content to share it, to have a partner in the burden. The palace where Marcus now lived and ruled was vast, a sprawling complex on the Palatine Hill overlooking the Forum. But Marcus occupied only modest quarters within it. His bedroom was simple: a bed, a desk, a few shelves for books. He kept the same habits he had developed as a student. Each morning, he rose before dawn. Often he would walk to the window and look out over Rome as the city awakened, watching the light touch the domes and columns, hearing the distant sounds of life beginning: merchants opening shops, bread ovens firing, the first wagons rumbling over stone streets. Before beginning the day's official duties, Marcus would retreat to his study for his morning practice. He would read from his philosophical texts, often choosing passages at random, letting the ancient wisdom speak to his present moment. Then he would spend time in contemplation, sitting perfectly still, following his breath, settling his mind. This morning stillness became his anchor, the point of calm from which all his activity flowed. Without it, he felt unmoored, reactive, vulnerable to being swept away by the demands and crises that constantly arose. Then came the steady stream of imperial business: advisors to consult, petitions to hear, laws to consider, provinces to govern, armies to manage. Rome was a vast machine requiring constant attention, countless decisions, endless mediation between competing interests. Marcus approached it all with the same patient equanimity his adoptive father had modeled. He listened carefully, considered deeply, tried to balance justice with mercy, principle with practicality. He was known for his accessibility. Unlike some emperors who isolated themselves from their subjects, Marcus made himself available. He would hear cases personally, listening to grievances from citizens of all classes. He treated freedmen with the same courtesy he showed senators. "We are all equally far from perfection," he reminded himself. "We are all trying to find our way." The afternoons often brought meetings with his council, discussions of policy, reviews of military matters. The empire was vast, and its borders were constantly pressured by outside peoples seeking entry or conquest. Marcus could never simply enjoy philosophy in isolation. The hard realities of power and defense always intruded. But he tried to bring Stoic principles even to these harsh necessities. When force was required, let it be measured and purposeful. When punishment was necessary, let it be just. When decisions were difficult, let them be made with clear reasoning rather than anger or fear. And in this peace, we continue. In the evenings, after the day's public duties were complete, Marcus would return to his private chambers. He would dine simply. The banquets and feasts were for state occasions, not his personal preference. A piece of fish or fowl, some vegetables, bread, perhaps fruit. He drank wine moderately, watered in the Roman fashion. He would spend time with his children when they were young, asking about their studies, their days, teaching them as he had been taught. Then, as night deepened and the palace grew quiet, Marcus would return to his study. It was in these late evening hours, by lamplight, that Marcus wrote the thoughts and reflections that would eventually become known as his meditations. He never called them that. He had no title for them. They were simply his notebooks, his private conversations with himself, written in Greek because that was the language of philosophy, the language in which he thought most deeply. He would sit at his desk with fresh ink and papyrus, the lamp casting a warm circle of light, and write. Sometimes he wrote about the day's events and his response to them. Sometimes he wrote general observations about human nature and virtue. Often he wrote reminders to himself, pep talks for the difficult work of living philosophically in the midst of power's temptations and responsibilities. When you wake up in the morning, he wrote on one such evening, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I feel angry at my brother or hate him. We were born to work together. These were not beautiful literary compositions. They were working documents, practical philosophy, tools for living. Marcus wrote them for himself, to remind himself, to shore up his resolve when it flagged, to pull himself back to his principles when he strayed. They were armor against the corrupting influence of absolute power, a way of staying true to himself amidst temptations and pressures that would have twisted most men. He knew the dangers of his position. He knew how power corrupted, how it could make a man believe he was above ordinary morality, above the rules that governed others. He fought against this corruption through daily practice, through constant self-examination, through these written reminders of who he wanted to be. Breathe deeply now. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. The impediment to action advances action, Marcus wrote. What stands in the way becomes the way. This was pure Stoicism, the idea that obstacles are opportunities for virtue, that difficulties are the very material through which we develop our character. A smooth life teaches nothing. It is in the struggle to respond well to challenges that we become who we are meant to be. Marcus faced no shortage of challenges as emperor. Wars broke out along the northern frontier, requiring years of military campaigning. A terrible plague swept through the empire, killing countless thousands, possibly millions. Economic difficulties strained the treasury. Political rivals conspired and needed to be managed. Natural disasters struck various provinces, earthquakes and floods and fires. It was a difficult reign by any measure, far from the peaceful stability that Antoninus Pius had enjoyed. But Marcus never complained about these difficulties in his writings. He accepted them as the necessary conditions of his life, as the curriculum through which he would learn and grow. "This is what I have been put here to do," he reminded himself. Not to have an easy time, but to respond well to whatever came. The quality of his response was within his control, the difficulties themselves were not. This distinction gave him freedom even amidst constraint, peace even amidst turmoil. He often wrote about the shortness of life and the importance of using time well. "You could leave life right now," he reminded himself. "Let that determine what you do and say and think." This was memento mori, remember death, not as morbid preoccupation, but as clarifying perspective. When you remembered that your time was limited, that each day might be your last, it became easier to let go of petty concerns, to focus on what truly mattered, to live with intention and presence. Death was not an enemy to fear, but a teacher to consult, a reminder of priorities, a call to make each moment count. "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be," Marcus wrote. "Be one." This was characteristic of his approach, less interested in abstract theorizing than in actual practice, less concerned with appearing virtuous than with being virtuous. Philosophy was not a spectator sport. It was something you lived, moment by moment, choice by choice, throughout the texture of ordinary days. You couldn't think your way to virtue. You had to act your way there, building the habit of good choices, training yourself like an athlete trains their body. In the palace gardens, Marcus would sometimes walk alone at twilight, much as he had done as a young man. He would watch the light fade, would note the exact moment when the first star appeared. These simple observations grounded him in the present moment, pulled him out of the endless mental chatter about past and future. The garden was peaceful, eternal in its cycles. Flowers bloomed and faded. Seasons turned. The fountain played on, regardless of empire or emperor. There was comfort in this, a reminder of nature's indifference that paradoxically brought peace. Marcus understood deeply that he was playing a role, the role of emperor. It was an important role, consequential, demanding, but it was not the totality of who he was. Beneath the purple robes, beneath the titles and the power, he was simply a human being trying to live well, no different in essence from any other person. This understanding kept him humble, kept him from the arrogance that power so often breeds. "Asia and Europe are just two corners of the universe," he wrote. "Every ocean is just a drop in the universe. The present moment is just a point in eternity. Everything is small, changeable, vanishing." From this cosmic perspective, even being emperor was a small thing, a temporary assignment, a role that would pass to another soon enough. "The universe is change," he wrote, "and life is opinion." Everything was in flux, constantly shifting, nothing permanent except the principles you chose to live by. External circumstances would always change. He could not control them, but he could control his response, his judgment, his inner state. This was the heart of Stoic practice, and Marcus returned to it again and again, like a musician returning to a fundamental scale, like a craftsman returning to basic techniques. His relationships with other people were guided by these same principles. He tried to see each person as a fellow traveler, struggling with their own challenges, doing their best according to their understanding. When someone acted badly, Marcus would pause and consider, what made them act this way? What fear, what pain, what misunderstanding drove their behavior? This practice of empathetic understanding didn't mean accepting bad behavior, but it prevented the rise of personal hatred or vengefulness. "The best revenge," Marcus wrote, "is to be unlike him who performed the injury. When someone wronged him, The Stoic response was not retaliation, but continued adherence to virtue. Let them be unjust, you remain just. Let them be cruel, you remain kind. Your character was your responsibility, theirs was their own. Breathe deeply. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. The years of Marcus's reign passed in their rhythm, seasons of war alternating with periods of peace, times of crisis balanced by interludes of stability. Through it all, Marcus maintained his philosophical practice. Each morning, the same routine: rising early, contemplation, reading, setting intention for the day. Each evening, the same reflection: reviewing the day, writing his thoughts, recommitting to his principles. This consistency was crucial. Philosophy was not something you did occasionally, when you felt inspired or had free time. It was a daily discipline, like exercise or eating, necessary for maintaining health. Not physical health, but spiritual health, the health of the soul. He grew older. His hair turned gray, then white. His face became lined with the years of responsibility and concern. But his mind remained clear, his purpose steady. He never lost sight of what mattered: to live according to nature, to fulfill his role with excellence, to respond to every situation with virtue, to maintain inner freedom regardless of external circumstance. These weren't abstract ideals, but practical guides for daily living. Principles he applied to everything from great matters of state to small personal interactions. In his later years, Marcus spent much time on the northern frontier, leading campaigns against Germanic tribes that threatened the empire's borders. It was far from Rome, far from civilization's comforts. He lived in military camps, endured harsh weather, dealt with the brutal realities of war. The campaigns were difficult, dangerous, often frustrating. Progress was slow, victories temporary, losses painful. But even here, perhaps especially here, he maintained his philosophical practice. In a tent by lamplight, amid the sounds of a military camp settling down for the night, guards calling passwords, horses shifting in their lines, the low murmur of soldiers' conversations, Marcus would open his notebooks and write. Look within, he reminded himself. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig. External circumstances might be harsh, uncomfortable, frightening, but the inner resource of philosophy remained available always, a well that never ran dry. He wrote with increasing urgency in these later notebooks, as if sensing his time was growing short. Do not waste the remaining time of your life, he told himself, in thoughts about others, unless doing so leads to some common good. For you deprive yourself of other opportunities by imagining what someone else is doing and why, and what they're thinking and scheming. Stay focused on your own task, your own work of becoming better. You don't have time to worry about others' opinions, to try to read their minds, to imagine what they think of you. You have your own work to do. If you find anything in human life better than justice, truth, self-control, courage, Marcus wrote, embrace it without hesitation. But if you find nothing greater than the good spirit that dwells within you, if you find everything else smaller and of lesser value, then give it no room. This was his final wisdom, distilled from a lifetime of practice. Virtue was the only true good, the only thing worth pursuing, the only reliable source of peace. And in this peace, we continue. Marcus's final years were marked by increasing physical frailty. The plague years had weakened him. The endless campaigns had worn him down. He had never been robust. Even as a young man, he had struggled with health issues. Now, in his late 50s, the accumulated toll of decades of duty and difficulty weighed heavily on his aging body. But his spirit remained undimmed. He continued to rise early, to practice his philosophy, to fulfill his duties. He knew his death was approaching. He could feel it in his body, in the way simple tasks became difficult, in the fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. But he faced it without fear, with curiosity almost, as he might face any new experience. He thought often about death in these final times, not morbidly, but philosophically. Death was natural, he reminded himself. Everyone who had ever lived had died. Everyone who lived now would die. It was simply part of the pattern, the great cycle of nature. To fear death was to misunderstand it. Death was not an evil, but simply a change of state, a transformation, a return of elements to the great whole from which they had temporarily been organized into the form called Marcus Aurelius. Do not fear death, he had written years earlier, but welcome it, since it too comes from nature. For just as we are young and grow old, and flourish and reach maturity, and develop teeth and a beard and gray hairs, and beget and become pregnant and give birth, and all the other natural functions that the seasons of life bring, so also do we dissolve. This is fitting for a person who uses reason to think through death not with passion, but with calm acceptance. In the spring of 180, in a military camp near the Danube River, Marcus took ill with a fever. It was similar to the illness that had taken his adoptive father 19 years earlier. Fever, weakness, loss of appetite. Marcus knew immediately that this was likely his end. He called for his son Commodus, gave him final instructions and encouragement, knowing that the young man would now become emperor, would inherit all the responsibilities that Marcus had carried for so long. He spoke briefly with his closest advisors, made arrangements for the transition of power. Then he requested to be left alone. In the quiet of his tent, as the fever burned through him, Marcus thought about his life. Had he lived according to his principles? Not perfectly. He knew his failings, his moments of anger, his lapses in patience and understanding. But he had tried. Every day, he had tried to be better, to respond with virtue, to maintain inner freedom regardless of circumstances. That trying was what mattered. Not perfection, but practice. Not flawless execution, but sincere effort. He thought about all the people he had known and loved. Antoninus Pius, who had shown him what goodness looked like in power. His teachers, Rusticus and Apollonius and Sextus, and all the others, who had given him the gift of philosophy. Faustina, who had walked beside him through life's complexities, who had given him children, who had been his partner and companion. His children, each precious, each carrying forward life into the future. Friends, advisors, even adversaries, all connected, all part of the great web of human existence. Breathe deeply now. Let these ancient scenes wash over you. Sleep is near. As consciousness faded, Marcus returned to the fundamental Stoic insights that had guided his entire life. Everything is interconnected. Everything is in flux. The only thing we truly control is our own response, our own character, our own judgments. External circumstances, even life and death, are indifferent, neither good nor bad in themselves. What matters is how we meet them, the virtue we bring to each moment, the quality of attention we maintain. Death smiles at us all, Marcus had written once, but all a man can do is smile back. This was not resignation, but active acceptance, finding peace not by avoiding difficulty, but by embracing the totality of existence, including its end. The fever deepened. Marcus's breathing grew shallow. The sounds of the military camp outside his tent faded into a distant murmur, like waves on a far shore. And in that fading, there was no drama, no crisis, no desperate struggle. Just a gentle letting go, a return, a completion. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, died as he had lived, with equanimity, with acceptance, with philosophical calm. And so his life ended, but his words lived on. The notebooks he had written for himself, never intending them for public eyes, were discovered and preserved. They were copied and shared, passed from hand to hand, from generation to generation. What he had written for himself became a gift to all who sought wisdom about how to live. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The world changed beyond recognition. But the words of Marcus Aurelius continued to speak to people struggling with the same fundamental questions. How should we live? What can we control? How do we find peace in a difficult world? His answers, born of decades of practice and reflection, remained as relevant as ever. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, he had written. Simple words, but profound. What you pay attention to, how you frame experiences, the stories you tell yourself about what happens. These shape your experience more than the circumstances themselves. Choose your thoughts carefully. Question your assumptions. Don't believe everything you think. Very little is needed to make a happy life, he wrote. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking, not in possessions, not in status, not in others' opinions, not in circumstances, but in the quality of your inner life, in your principles, in your practice of virtue, in your moment-to-moment choices about how to be in the world. This was the wisdom he had learned from his teachers, practiced throughout his life, and left behind for us. And tonight, as you rest, his wisdom reaches across the centuries to touch you, to offer you the same peace it offered him, to remind you that you too can live well, can find tranquility, can maintain your center no matter what storms rage around you. And in this peace, we continue into the gentle darkness of sleep. Close your eyes now and let the image of Marcus Aurelius fade into the background. See him one final time in his study, writing by lamplight, putting words to paper not for glory but for understanding, not for others but for himself, creating a ladder of wisdom that would reach across the centuries to touch your life in this very moment. The lamp burns low. The night is deep and quiet. Outside, the stars turn in their ancient patterns, indifferent and beautiful, the same stars that watched over Rome, the same stars that will shine long after we are all gone. Inside, Marcus sets down his stylus and closes his notebook. He rises from his desk, stretches slightly, feeling the ache in his shoulders, the stiffness in his back. He walks to the window. He looks out over the sleeping city, over all the countless lives being lived, each person struggling with their own challenges, seeking their own peace. And he smiles slightly, because he understands that we are all connected in this struggle, that we are all part of the same great pattern, that we are all trying to make our way through the mystery of existence with whatever wisdom we can gather. His life's work has been to gather that wisdom, to practice it, to live it as fully as he could. And now, as the night deepens, he feels satisfied. Not perfect, but satisfied. He has done his best. That is all any person can do. Tomorrow there will be more work, more challenges, more opportunities to practice virtue. But tonight, there is rest. Tonight, there is peace. Tonight, he can let go, knowing he has been faithful to his principles, has lived according to his nature, has played his role as well as he knew how. Breathe deeply now. Feel yourself sinking deeper into rest. Marcus Aurelius whispers across the ages. His wisdom is not a burden to carry, but a gentle hand on your shoulder, reminding you that everything is as it should be, that you too are doing your best, that sleep is natural and good and waiting for you. Let go of all effort now. Let go of all striving. The philosopher-emperor has shown you that peace is not something to achieve, but something to accept, not something external to find, but something internal to recognize. It has been there all along, beneath the noise and worry, beneath the endless thinking, beneath all the stories you tell yourself. Sink deeper into the darkness. Let the ancient wisdom hold you. Marcus Aurelius knew what you need to know, that this moment is enough, that you are enough, that everything you need is already within you. The lamp goes out. The night embraces all. And in this vast, peaceful darkness, you rest at last, held by the same forces that held Marcus, part of the same eternal pattern, connected to all beings across time and space who have sought to live well, to find peace, to make sense of this brief, beautiful, difficult journey we call life. Sleep now. The philosopher-emperor watches over you. His words float like a blessing through the centuries. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But you don't need strength now. Only surrender. Only peace. Only the gentle letting go into sleep's welcoming arms. Deeper still, deeper into rest, where there is no Rome, no emperor, no struggles, no questions, only the timeless peace that was before words, before empires, before all the concerns that fill the waking mind. This peace is your birthright. This peace is your home. Return to it now. Sink into it completely. Let everything else fade away. And in this final peace, where even the memory of Marcus Aurelius dissolves into pure restful darkness, you sleep. Deeply, completely. Held by ancient wisdom, cradled by timeless truth, safe in the knowledge that you are part of something larger than yourself, that you are connected to all who have lived and all who will live, that your struggles are universal struggles, that your search for peace is the same search that has occupied humans since the beginning, and that peace is possible. Peace is here. Peace is now, in this breath, in this darkness, in this perfect, complete rest. Sleep, 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 until morning comes again and brings its own gentle light. But that is for later. For now, only this, only sleep, only peace, forever and always, breathing so slowly, thinking nothing, being everything. Rest, rest, rest.